Whenever you're ready, Cynthia.
Okay, we can start. Good. Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Simpiwe Ngwenya, and I am a program manager in the mitigation team of the PCC. Welcome to the Energy Dialogue on the transition to new energy vehicles. I would like to extend a special welcome to our PCC commissioners, if they are online, our facilitator, Commissioner Joanne Yawich, and our program participants. We are really grateful that all of you could join this crucial discussion that cuts across so many areas of the country's energy transition and economy. So this particular conversation is very important as the automotive industry is a significant contributor to the country's economy and employment. And for more context on this dialogue is that so our trade partners, international trade partners, and to make mention of the EU, have announced a ban on imported internal combustion vehicles in 2035. However, the impacts and the rules to outlaw imported ICE vehicles begin to bite years before the ban. And therefore, it's important for us to really make plans to transition the sector even before 2035 and unlock the market locally. And just to note that the transition of this industry is not only important to ensure socio-economic sustainability, but it's also to reduce the emissions from the transport sector, in particular, road and other sectors, and other sectors globally, which are a contributor to the climate change, global climate change emissions and impact. So the transition to NEVs is one of the many moving parts of the energy transition, which requires collaboration from all social partners. This is the first dialogue on new energy vehicles, and will definitely not be the last as we seek to understand how to transition this sector in a just manner that is underpinned by the principles of the just transition. With that said, I will hand over to our facilitator, Commissioner Joanne Yawich. Joanne is a commissioner of the PCC Net Zero Working Group, and she leads the JET-IP Project Management Unit, whose investment plan identified the financing needs for the transition to new energy vehicles. Thank you. I will hand over to you, Joanne.
Okay, thanks, Simpiwe, and morning, everybody on the call. I see that we are up to around 64 participants who come from quite a broad cross-section of stakeholders, either with expertise or interest in this matter. So I'm looking forward to a really constructive conversation. We have quite a packed program this morning. There are 5 speakers. I'm going to suggest that what we do is, I'm hoping that all of them are going to keep within 10 minutes or less in relation to their input, and that we take all of them and then leave ourselves an hour for discussion, if that is okay. I think that clearly if there's any burning or critical issues that anyone wants to raise, kind of put your hand up, but I think that might be a reasonable way to proceed. In addition, I'm sure there will be a lively conversation in the chat. And please put your questions in the Q&A so that the panelists, as we go along, can get a sense of the issues that are on your minds and the things that you would like them to deal with when they come back to respond to the issues from the floor. So without maybe let me just go through the panelists before we start, and then I'm just going to ask them to come on one after the other. So The first speaker who's going to address the road to the just transition for the transport sector is Ms. Phulani Manale, who's the Director of Integrated Transport Planning at the Department of Transport. Phulani will be followed by Dr. Norman Lamprecht, who's the Executive for Trades, Export and Research and Chair of the NEV Committee at NAMSA, the Automotive Industry Association. Then Mr. Mzwakhe Mbata, who is a policy analyst from the DTIC, who has worked on the automotive sector for many years, followed by Daniel Coleman, who's the national researcher from NUMSA's Economic Research and Policy Institute. And then last, but very much not least, is Larissa Fenter, who heads up the government relations and process management at Zero Carbon Charge, a company dealing with NEV charging. So a fabulous panel of speakers. And without further ado, can I please hand over to Ms. Phulani Manale to make her input. And yeah, please, if you could keep it to 10 minutes or less, it would be fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy, and good morning, everyone. My name is Phulani Manale from the Department of Transport. I'm the Director Environmental Coordination. I deal with transport issues as related to environment, and I also participate in the United Nations Framework Convention negotiations following bunker fuels as an agenda item. I don't know if now I have to do the presentation, you'll guide me, and then if yes, I'll request Simpiwe to put on the presentation so that I can go through it. Thank you. Okay. As indicated, I'm going to do a presentation on our newly informed transport just transition plan that as a department we are planning to develop. Can I have a next slide, simply? Okay, as part of the introduction, the Department of Transport, we have developed the Green Transport Strategy, which was approved in 2018 in a response to combating the transport sector climate change emissions. And our Green Transport Strategy, it's a cornerstone of policy development within the transport sector, and it addresses the issues of sustainable mobility and the uptake of cleaner and more efficient technologies. And we see the GTS also as asserting the development of regulations that will promote efficient and lower carbon technologies, especially the new energy vehicles that today's dialogue are going to focus on. Next slide, please. As part of the introduction, transport is one of the sectors that is growing fast in terms of the emission reductions. Currently, transport, according to the greenhouse gas inventory report that was produced in 2017, we are producing about 13.3% of the national greenhouse gas emissions. And within that 13.3%, we have the road transport, which is contributing or more of the transport greenhouse gas emissions. And also, as the South African Just Energy Transition Investment Plan that was approved in 2022, transport has been identified as one of the key sectors that will need investment and assist in terms of transitioning to green economy. Next slide, please. Okay, this graph shows the emissions of the transport sector. I've indicated we are producing 13%, and out of the 100%, 95% is from the road sector. Hence, we see as the department that the road sector is one of the key subsectors that we need to look at firstly as the department into how we can transition it. Next slide, please. As part of the problem statement, our South African automotive industry, it plays a huge role, instrumental role in terms of our economy. they are contributing about 4.9 of the GDP. This was in 2020 report. And then the industry also supports the country's biggest socioeconomic challenge of unemployment by making a vital contribution to the social upliftment of communities, etc. And currently, we are about plus 100 people work into the auto manufacturing industry, and those are mostly centered in our Gauteng province, KZN province, and the Eastern Cape. And also with the pronouncement of the United Kingdom and the European Union to phase out the ICE vehicles by 2030 and 2035. So as the department, we have seen it fit that we also need to do something, as the phase out will threaten our South African economy. Next slide, please. And not only looking at the mitigation, as we might know, transport is being perceived as only being the sector that is emitting. However, the sector is also prone to extreme weather events, and then it means we need to have adaptation measures in terms of coming up with climate resilient infrastructures. I might refer to the recent floods that happened in the provinces of KZN, Eastern Cape, Northwest, etc. That proved that as a transport, we really need to respond to climate change and come up with national adaptation measures. And we see that as a problem that as a transport, we need to transition and come up with those measures. I think we've been hearing on the news that there are a lot of vessels, ships that are stranded there in Richards Bay because of the infrastructure. So those are some of the things that we will be looking at. Next slide. So in terms of the policy directive of how then did we come up with why we need to develop the Transport Just Transition Plan. Internationally, we are guided by the United Nations Framework Convention. We are guided by the Paris Agreement, nationally determined contributions that were submitted at COP26. We're also guided by the Sustainable Development Goals. And then when it comes to nationally, the Constitution governs us and give us a directive to look at environmental issues. And we also have the white paper on national climate change response policy. And we have our national development plan that talks about green economy. And we have our green transport strategy, which is our corner policy document for the transport sector. And then we also have the approved Just Transition Framework. So all these policies, they guide us into developing our Transport Just Transition Plan. Next slide, please. So coming now then to our Transport Just Transition Plan as a project, the ITUC has defined that Just Transition should secure the future and livelihoods of the workers and their communities in the transition to low carbon economy. And looking at that, our sector, as I've indicated, under the auto manufacturing, so it means we need to look at the livelihoods of the people that they will be affected when we start transitioning in the automotive. And accordingly also as identified or outlined in our South African Just Transition Plan framework, a just transition response to the following imperatives as indicated below. As how do we empower people? How do we ensure that the most impacted do not get left behind? And how do we support the goals of social inclusion? And how do we continue to solve South Africa's triple challenge of inequality, poverty, and unemployment? Next slide, please. So capturing all of those things as a Department of Transport, then we are in the process of developing the Transport Just Transition Plan. And our Transport Just Transition Plan will look at all modes of transport, being the roads, the rail, aviation, and maritime. And the plan will be developed in phases, where currently we'll start first with the land transportation, specifically road. As I've also indicated initially when I started my presentation, that roads contribute about 95%. And we are also going to look at or revise the current the current percentage or target that we have identified at our green transport strategy, so that it can align with our nationally determined contribution. And some of the elements that we are going to look at in developing our just transition plan will be what does transition to low economy in South African transport system mean for us, and what will be the available options. And then what does the transition to climate resilience for the transport system mean? And then what will be the available options? And most importantly, it will be what are the socioeconomic dimension of the transition, looking at 1 and 2, because as we understand, the socioeconomic part is the core of our just transition, and we need to ensure that it's been taken care of. Next slide, please. So part of the project deliverables will be coming up with a comprehensive transport sector specific just transition plan that articulates strategies, actions, and guidelines for a just and equitable transition to a low carbon economy. And we'll also look at the roadmap for executing the transport sector specific transition plan. And we'll also look at, we'll also have the recommendation for fostering job creation, skills development, and community engagement within the transport sector's transition process. Next slide. And another deliverable will be having an implementation plan that will have the new energy vehicle or energy vehicle roadmap on how then we can roll out or penetrate the market in terms of transitioning in a just and inclusive manner. Next slide. So progress so far, as I've indicated, we have just started. We have developed a situational analysis, and then in partnership with the Presidential Climate Commission, we had a technical workshop that was organized in June, so that then we can start capacitating the Department of Transport officials and or the key stakeholders within the department and our entities on what is just transition, what is expected, and how can they assist in terms of the projects or that they have in order for us to have a just transition plan. And we are expected to have the draft transport just transition plan by March 2023. And then following that, we'll have the key stakeholder consultations in the second quarter of 2024, where we'll be going through the key areas and consult on the draft just transition plan so that then it can be inclusive. And then the final plan is expected to be out of finalized by December 2024, where then it will start to have the approval process. With that being said, I would like to hand over to you, Joanne. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Pulani. I think that was a very, very short and clear. And so I gather from that a lot of public engagement and consultation around the overarching policy framework in the sector over the next year. So could I ask people to hold their questions? I see there are already some questions in the chat. Yeah, I'm not going to ask for them to be responded to now, but I think that if all of the speakers could look at them and be prepared to engage on them as we move forward. Our next speaker is Dr. Norman Lamprecht, as I said, from NAMSA. Let me hand over to you, Norman, and thank you for being on this platform. It was on, yeah, okay, all right, I see it's been taken down.
Chair, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this dialogue. Let me just share my screen again. Let me just, goodness. Chair, initially I had 20 minutes and then 15, and now it's down to 10 minutes.
Now I'm putting pressure on you. I apologize.
Yeah, I'm going to be try and be creative and so on. But Norman Lamprecht from NAMSA, representing all the vehicle manufacturers and importers in that country. I'm also managing director of the Automotive Industry Export Council, representing all 500 automotive companies, the export promotion and development activities I'm going to cut out a few things that I wanted to say, but from an automotive perspective, I believe it's always important to highlight the significance of the industry in the context of the South African economy. The automotive industry is still recovering from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and most of the new vehicle market key performance indicators will only return to pre-pandemic levels this year after 3 years. However, exports once again excelled in 2022 with several records to support the industry. As an export-oriented industry, 66.9% of vehicle production was exported last year, and exports therefore remain imperative to generate sufficient economies of scale benefits and to achieve improved international competitiveness. I don't know why this is not moving.
No, it
All right,
isn't.
can somebody just, some people, maybe if you can take over and just move to the next slide. Let me just stop sharing. Apologies for this.
Okay, no problem at all. We can do that.
The South African automotive industry understands the important role it plays to help achieve the broader goal of net zero emissions by 2015. In this regard, e-mobility can assist to meet climate obligations and greenhouse gas reduction targets. The global transition towards new energy vehicles is inevitable. The only way to have a successful automotive manufacturing base in South Africa is to keep up with global technological developments. Now, in this regard, the 2021 jointly funded NAMSA DTIC NEV research study aimed to develop an appropriate fiscal and regulatory framework that will make South Africa a leading, highly competitive location for global NEV production. Targets of 20%, 40%, and 60% have been set, thank you, for NEV sales as a percentage of the total market by 2025, 2030, and 2035, respectively. This was done in order to quantify the levels of NEV investments, localization, public charging infrastructure, and so on. 2035 timeframe is also aligned with the South African Automotive Master Plan 2035 timeline. Now, this modeling provides the high road scenario up to 2035, subject to all the recommendations from the study being approved for demand side stimulation, as well as support for the production of NEVs and NEV components in the country, and also to be implemented from 1 January 2022, a date which was obviously missed. The Presidential Climate Committee required from the automotive sector to have about 750,000 battery electric vehicles on our roads by 2030, in line with the sectoral requirements. Now, if we look at the high road scenario table, it shows that 400,000 BEVs on the road could be achieved by 2030 and about 1.2 million by 2035, subject to all the recommendations being approved. Next slide, please. This slide just summarizes the recommendations of the NAMSA DTIC NEV research study to support the transition of the domestic automotive industry to an NEV-dominated market, while continuing to develop the industry with the objectives of the SA Automotive Master Plan. Industry continues to reiterate to government that it will only be through the balancing of both demand and supply side considerations that the future of the South African automotive industry can be secured. Although industry is export-oriented and need to safeguard its exports via the production of NEV and NEV components in the country, the 35% to 40% production for the domestic market is also imperative to sustain the industry. And here we need to address the price differential, which on average is about 52% between an ICE vehicle and a BEV. 3 of the 7 OEMs depend on more than 50% of their vehicle production on domestic sales, of which 2 close to 80% of their vehicle productions. When industry approaches government, it's typically with evidence-based solutions, considering the fiscal constraints. In this regard, and importantly, NAMSA highlighted not only the costs of the NEV transitional requirements, but also the huge benefits to the fiscus. We have done the calculations, and for every R1 spent by Treasury on the automotive industry, the return is 21.5 times. That's just for the 7 OEMs. The long-awaited announcement by the Minister of Finance in the medium-term budget policy statement on 1 November recognized the significance of the automotive industry to the country's economy, and also that the transition to NEVs posed a real threat to South African vehicle production. In this regard, the Minister said that National Treasury planned to implement tax and expenditure measures to support the industry's transition to NEVs. However, the details for this policy would only be announced in the 2024 budget review. Now, again, this delay continues to present major risks to business opportunities in the industry. In layman's terms, a passenger car life cycle is 7 years and a bakkie and SUV 10 years. The investment decision by the head office is taken 3 years before the start of a production. This means that if an OEM misses out on an investment opportunity for a new generation model, it could wait a decade for the next investment opportunity. I've seen the reference in the agenda for the total ban of ICE sales in South Africa from 2035 onwards, but I don't believe the country will at all be ready for that, considering all the delays in NEV policy certainty going forward. Next slide, please. Yeah, Chair, let me just go quickly here. There is a timeline. Developments on the NEV side already started in 2010 in South Africa. However, when the UK as our industry's top export destination since 2014, and now brought forward the ban on the sale of ICE vehicles from 2035 to 2030, which they announced in November 2020, I think that's when our industry's NEV efforts and activities really started to accelerate. The first hybrid, the Toyota Prius, was sold in South Africa in 2006, and the first battery electric vehicle, the Nissan Leaf, was sold in 2013. Next slide, please. Despite the fact that NEV sales reflected a significant year-on-year increase of 421.7% from 896 units to 4,674 in 2022, they still remain insignificant as a percentage of total new vehicle sales, comprising only 0.88%. Luckily, this year we've reached that mark, the 1% mark for the first time. For the 3 quarters of the year, we saw a 67% year-on-year increase by 17 brands and 1.29% now. The total NEV park in the country stands at 17,102 units, of which 2,077 battery electric vehicles. Next slide. Access to global markets has been enhanced through the trade arrangements with most of South Africa's major trading partners. Europe continued to dominate as a region, accounting for 72.7%, or nearly 3 out of every 4 vehicles exported last year. Now, although our industry exported vehicles and components to 152 countries around the world in 2022, it's good to have a large customer, but the risk is there that the developments in the region have a direct and measurable impact on the South African automotive industry. A case in point is that the banning of the sale of ICE vehicles in the region by 2035, with top export destinations such as Germany already commencing from 2030 onwards, has resulted in the inevitable NEV transition for our industry to safeguard our exports. And it's also not just a vehicle, but in terms of the rules of origin, the vehicle must contain 60% local content to be exported duty-free into the EU. Otherwise, it defeats the whole purpose of the free trade agreement. Obviously, accumulation applies with the EU, but this means that the supply chain also needs to adapt. Next slide, please. NAMSA has also started to focus on the NEV transition requirements for the heavy commercial vehicle sector. The country faces the dual challenge of structural factors such as road degradation, as well as environmental factors, with the number of heavy trucks on the roads, which has increased from 2021 to 2022. And this is just reflecting the increasing reliance on road transport due to rail inefficiencies. Now, heavy commercial vehicle sales returned to pre-pandemic levels already last year as a result of the more sales, much quicker than the passenger cars and bakkies. But trucks and buses fall outside of the APDP2 policy framework, and therefore there are limited options. But the NAMSA Truck and Bus Subcommittee, NEV Subcommittee, has identified 2 main transitional requirements, which include legislation changes to accommodate the longer and heavier NEVs, as well as zero import duties for specified periods before localization to enhance market adoption. the upfront purchase price of these vehicles, which are 200 to 300% higher than the ICE equivalent, remains a major hurdle before the lower operating expense benefits could be enjoyed. Next slide, last one. In the order of 51 countries around the world have already announced the banning of the sale of ICE vehicles. I'm sure we'll never could get to this point, but the CSIR has done a macroeconomic impact assessment model to show the devastating effect if South Africa does not transition to NEVs and the 7 OEMs lose their export markets from 2030 onwards. This impact is underestimated as it excludes trucks and buses as well as the automotive component sector. But in 2030, 58% of our industry's export markets, including the top markets such as UK, Germany, and so on, will start banning the sale of ICE vehicles. Now, due to the synergies of the automotive sector with most other sectors of the economy, the impact will result in a loss of about 108 billion to the country's GDP, investment losses of 269 billion, loss of job opportunities of 276,000, amongst others. And this will actually accelerate up to 2035 when 80% of the industry's export destinations will start banning the sale of ICE vehicles. An analysis that I've done for Norway, which has the most ambitious law to ban ICE vehicle sales by 2025, revealed that South African automotive exports to the country already contracted by more than half year on year in 2022, 3 years before that date. Now, since the impact of legislation to ban the sale of new ICE vehicles in our industry's main export markets from 2030 onwards will be felt way before the legislation date, it remains imperative for our government to move with speed to support the industry's inevitable transition to NEVs, to give it that much needed injection of confidence. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lamprecht. I mean, I think that is really interesting. I think that that example at the end of the impact of the already felt impact in relation to exports to a particular country is quite sobering. And so from the industry to government, again, and I'd like to introduce Mr. Mzwakhe Mbata, who is a policy analyst from the DTIC working in the sector. Over to you, Mr. Mbata.
Thank you very much. Greetings to the audience as well as the attendees. I'm trying, is my screen visible?
Yeah, your screen is we can see your screen. It just needs to be put on. Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks.
Okay. Is it fine?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think at this point, one would love to provide the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition perspective on the just transition and the new energy vehicle roadmap. And in this regard, one will have to start by documenting the policy evolution since 1994 September. On the 1st of September in 1996, when the Motor Industry Development Program was introduced. This was a program to support the industry to become more competitive. And thanks to the introduction of that program, South Africa as automotive industry was uncompetitive. Immediately during the apartheid era, South Africa's automotive industry was defined by what we call import substitution industrialization, which means that as a result of the sanctions, we could not export, and also that the whole industry was not competitive. And thanks to the introduction of the MIDP, which we have seen the industry evolving and doubling of exports, by 2015, as well as since 2000, since the introduction of this program. So the way we have been since 1996, South Africa has already had a policy framework for the support of this industry. And the just transition comes at a time when we have continued to provide the support to sustain the industry. As a result, I'm going to just touch on the steps that we have undertaken up until now, and also what we're waiting for in the next budget speech. But I'm also going to labor on what has already been referred to. How can I move to the second slide?
I'm not
Can
certain
I
if
be
any
remoted to the second slide?
PCC team can help.
Oh, I must have-
Okay.
Thanks.
Can you try and drive your own slides, but also we are not in possession of your presentation. So can you try and move to the next slide?
Oh, thank you.
Okay, there we are.
Yes. So, first of all, the adoption of NEVs has increased globally, driven in part by greater incentives and consumer trends. A number of regulators have also taken the decision to ban the sale of ICE vehicles within the next 12 years as part and parcel of their contribution to achieving net zero emissions by 2050, including the markets like EU and the UK. These global trends will have significant impact on South Africa and its economy. Not only is South Africa the largest automotive manufacturing hub on the African continent, it is globally integrated, forming part of the global supply chain, which draws components from across the world, including SADC region, and exporting final products to more than 150 countries worldwide. As large number of countries transition to both their customer and production markets to NEVs, the impacts will be significant for South Africa's producers. So in this regard, our major markets, which is the EU and the UK, already put a ban to the continuation of ICE vehicles, and they have dates of 2030 and 2035 respectively. And if therefore we do not do anything, the consequences will be dire for both our economy as well as the industry as a whole, because it will mean that the current jobs of almost 110,000 for the entire industry will also be at risk. So the risk of not acting decisively is going to lead to dire consequences. Hence, we are well aware as the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, and we are alive to the reality that we must act, and we must act very quickly. So part of our responsibility, borrowing as well from our sister department, the Department of Transport, is to reduce greenhouse emissions. Transport has been noted as the fastest growing source of greenhouse gas emissions, accounting for almost 10.8% of national GHG emissions. Road transport specifically contributes 91.2% of transport sector emissions from the combustion of petrol and diesel. South Africa's Just Energy Transition Investment Plan for the initial period of 5 years identified key areas of investment for the transition, including public transport, manufacturing, and charging infrastructure. National Treasury, as well as part of our sister departments, introduced carbon taxes in 2019 to trigger behavioral changes towards cleaner alternatives. So, as I said initially, if we do not do anything, maintaining the status quo will have dire consequences. It will result into loss of key export markets for both assembled vehicles and components. Currently, 46% of our vehicles produced in South Africa are exported to the United Kingdom and European Union. And then these countries have made commitments to ban ICE vehicles in the next 12 years, as I said. Approximately 67% of countries' component exports are at risk due to projected decline in demand for ICE-specific components. So in the next 10 years to 15 years, I think South Africa does not have, luxury of time in terms of us preparing for this journey, and the transition should also be just. I then labored on the green transport strategy that has several pillars, including to offer producers of EV vehicle manufacturing incentives to both produce and sell affordable EVs in South Africa for both local and export markets, work with local research institutions to conduct research on EV batteries, work with national, provincial, as well as local government departments and authorities and the automotive industry to set annual targets for uptake of EVs and hybrid electric vehicles, including the government fleet. Consider providing incentives to related beneficiation of using local resources in the manufacturing of key machineries and all components, e.g. fuel cells. Assist in establishing and developing local electric vehicles OEMs, which is already some of our OEMs here that are located here in South Africa are having advanced plans to transition. Some are experimenting, some are already bringing some of the hybrid vehicles already, some are also launching this type of vehicles, that are categorized under new energy vehicles. So at this point, the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition published the Auto Green Paper 2 years ago, and this paper has now evolved into a roadmap to a white paper. It can only be released immediately after the next budget speech. My colleague, Dr. Norman Lambrecht, indicated that the Minister of Finance gave a stamp of approval and also the express commitment of government as a whole to support the just transition as well as the manufacturing of these vehicles. So what is outstanding at this point is the nitty-gritties, including the detail in terms of the package of support. But what we're also emphasizing from the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition is that any manufacturer at this point can approach the Department of Trade and Industry should they want to enter into this space. We will never reject them. So we will have to walk the same journey with them. And we have received various comments from different stakeholders as part and parcel of the consultation, including academics, agencies, as well as industry stakeholders. What came out of this engagement with the stakeholders are 4 areas, including grid stabilization, prioritization of charging infrastructure, the need for appropriate tax incentives as part of the strategy, prioritization of skills development and policy coordination. Those are pillars that were also emphasized to form an architecture of support. And also some of the concerns that were raised, including our national grid in terms of energy crisis. And these concerns have been considered and discussed with industry in detail. And it was important that government provides a policy framework for just transition to NEVs, take into account various proposals received as well as government priorities. The support measures that are being proposed as the way forward, amongst others, which we are going to elaborate. They include the development and as well as the implementation of a framework for government fleet to transition to SA-produced NEVs. Evaluate the need for regulation of NEV charging stations, and as well as the scaling up of investment for charging infrastructure and deepening localization. All this can only be possible through partnership and collaboration. One of the critical area of that can lead to serious constraint is lack of resources. So we are trying by all means to ensure that we transition justly, but also we do not we assure the industry in terms of policy certainty and the support in the manner that will also sustain the jobs. So I think in the main, these are the pillars of intervention that are proposed as part and parcel of the roadmap. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mzwakhe. And so far, it seems to me that we are all in violent agreement about the need to move fast, but it looks to me as though we're actually moving quite slow. I mean, that is an ignorant comment, but I will I'd be very interested to hear some views on that. And maybe to just draw your attention before we go on to hear from Daniel to the questions in the chat. A lot of them are around regulatory and legislative frameworks and policy documents, so it might be useful to come back. But please, could all of the panelists have a look at that? Okay, we've heard from government, we've heard from the industry, and now we are going to hear the perspective from the labor movement. I think our conversation around the just transition in South Africa has focused very much thus far on coal workers and the coal value chain. But I do believe that the same issues apply with possibly, in fact, I mean, and I think this is to be established, an equally large number of people and economies that could be affected if we don't succeed in this transition. So Daniel, as I said, is a researcher from the NUMSA Economic Research and Policy Institute. And over to you, Daniel. We're looking forward to hear your perspective. Thanks.
Thanks, Joanne, and greetings to everyone on the call. Thank you also to the PCC for convening this dialogue and to the presenters for their input so far. In my reflections today, I want to take a bit of a step back and make three main points before I get into the kind of detail of NUMSA's position on specific policy measures. So the one point is that neoliberal economic policies are a major constraint to pursuing the necessary measures to ensure the transition from ICE to NEVs is just. We need to ensure that workers in the auto sector are not sacrificed on the altar of the race to the bottom, and ensure manufacturing and industrialization grows in the country. As Joanne mentioned, the auto sector, the jobs in the auto sector, there's a huge number of jobs at risk that is possibly comparable to the coal sector at the moment. So the second point I want to make is that a structural transformation of the economy that is currently based on the minerals, energy, and finance complex is needed. The third point is that despite the limits that we have created by the prevailing neoliberal orthodoxy and the limits of the need for structural transformation that may not come tomorrow, we still believe as NUMSA that certain policy measures can and should be pursued to localize production of NEVs under the current conditions. So with that point, my reflections aren't completely cynical. As a union, historically, we have played a catalytic vanguard role in championing manufacturing and industrialization as constituting the key epicenter for development for South Africa. We submit that as social partners in the industry, we must continue to draw inspiration, given that we have been in the forefront of what has been a successful auto industry with critical interventions we champion, from MIDP to APDP, Vision 2035, and the SA Automotive Master Plan. So automotive manufacturing is now confronting a new challenge in the transition from ICE to NEVs. And the compulsory task for leadership of all social partners, as there's clear agreement on this call, including the government and the PCC, is to appreciate that we live in a world that is dynamic and consistently changing. Such change is not neutral. It is shaped by class interests on a national and international scale. So we have got a duty in every step of the way to act in the interests of the people we represent in terms of taking measures that defend existing jobs and create the most needed jobs. We must appreciate that if we do not move with the necessary speed as a country, we will be left behind. However, we know that currently the main competitive edge for manufacturing, auto manufacturing in South Africa, lies in cheap labor costs and favorable government policy. We need to think critically about these two factors and withhold any support for a transition to NEVs that comes at the expense of workers, the working class, and South Africa's manufacturing capacity as a whole. In the US, the UAW recently went on a 6-week strike explicitly around this, the transition of the big three auto companies. And they made it clear that they didn't want to be a part of this race to the bottom as part of the transition to electric vehicles. So I want to move to the second point now, on the limits of, to the first point, on the limits of neoliberal economic policies. For OEMs to invest in South Africa, we had to put up a very expensive incentive regime. Now the fight we are pushing as NOMSA is to call on the state to intervene, to take the necessary measures to make sure that we can be the destination to manufacture new energy vehicles on the back of localization and beneficiation. However, it is necessary to properly situate the context that this transition takes place within, where as a whole, the country has undergone decades of deindustrialization. On one hand, we are here calling to protect and grow manufacturing capacity, which relies on a state that intervenes in the economy with an expansionary budget. But on the other hand, and in reality, the government is fully committed to neoliberal austerity, as shown by the medium-term budget speech recently. It is very difficult to sit here and speak about what should be done to stay ahead of the transition to NEVs and in the transition to a low-carbon economy when there does not exist the expansionary budget to build the necessary infrastructure, to invest in research and development, to drive technology innovation, to drive skills development, to provide cheap and reliable electricity, and to provide efficient, expansive freight and passenger rail services. I mean, in the speech it was announced that 21 billion rand was cut for this year, 64 billion rand for next year, and 69 billion rand for the 2025-26 financial year. So then this question of austerity brings us also to the question of the collapsed electricity sector. And that was mentioned in the DTIC presentation as grid stability as a key factor in the transition to electric vehicles. So reliable and cheap electricity is a bedrock for successful manufacturing industries and economic growth anywhere in the world, especially if we're pursuing NEVs. However, Eskom has been throttled by the commercialization of electricity, the expectation to be a profit-making entity, neoliberal austerity, and finally, the privatization of energy provision in the country in the form of IPPs. The crisis of the electricity sector, caused by neoliberal undercutting of Eskom's capacity, has plunged both communities and the economy in rolling blackouts. It is man-made and it could have been avoided, and the costs to the economy are disastrous. So that's one part of the neoliberal austerity measures that are limiting how just this transition to NEVs can be. At the same time, Transnet has been allowed to follow the same death spiral of austerity budgeting that has led to its privatization more recently from the ports to the railways. You can see the Durban port has recently been auctioned off. We also saw 7.4 billion rand cut from the transport budget in 2021. The poor performance of Transnet is a huge barrier to the growth of manufacturing industries in South Africa. And I'm aware that in the green transport policy, there's an important progressive point made that a modal shift is needed from road to rail. That's in passenger transport and in freight transport. But if the public transport budget is being cut, if Transnet is being auctioned off, how is the freight rail network going to be expanded, the passenger rail network going to be expanded under this yearly belt tightening? And how are we going to have an efficient rail service that can transport automotive components, automotive vehicles for trade? So again, internationally, all countries that have followed this path of deep privatization of their major SOEs have burnt their fingers, and they're busy trying to reverse the damage that has been done. we're seeing a shift at the moment, especially with climate policies as an emergence of a new green protectionism. But in South Africa, we're being held hostage by macroeconomic policies that are promoting the concentration and centralization of wealth in the hands of white monopoly capital through the pursuit of inflation targeting and persistent interest rate hikes. So to bring this back to this discussion, the broader macroeconomic environment is the determining factor for the nature and direction of the transition to NEVs, where technocratic capitalist solutions are enforced to enable a market-driven transition. And it has been decided that the job of government is to provide guarantees and de-risk the market for investors. This is both in energy generation and NEV manufacturing. NUMSA has consistently submitted to government. This is especially on the issue of just transition in the electricity sector. We've consistently submitted that such solutions to the climate crisis will only worsen the conditions of poverty, unemployment, and inequality in this country, and in any event, do nothing to address climate change. There's research that's shown the privatization of the electricity sector explicitly militates against the growth of renewable energy technologies. So progressive organizations of the working class and a progressive government have a responsibility to take ownership and control of this transition out of the hands of international finance capital and place it squarely within the hands of the working class. In order to be responsive, we need a decisive interventionist state in the economy that also directs development. As things stand, South Africa is rushing itself to meet targets that appease finance capital and to follow in the coattails of European policies, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, the ban on ICE, but it's being slow in implementing the measures necessary that genuinely provide the preconditions for a just transition. With international finance capital and EU and US policies designed to entrench their own market power that are a part of political trade wars with China, these policies are generally designed and also to ensure that African countries remain as commodity producers and importers of final manufactured green technologies. I'm aware I may be running low on time, so I may have to move a bit quick in my presentation. But the point I'm making is that this goes against the Kyoto Protocol, Paris Accord about the common but differentiated responsibilities of developed and developing countries, and acknowledging South Africa's need as a developing country to transition according to its own concrete challenges. And in the NEV transition, what this relates to is that South Africa has to be a part of the downstream industry, building its manufacturing capabilities and the latest technologies, and should not just be importing final products. I'm going to move. I think the points have been made around the importance of the auto sector at the moment by the previous speakers. There's about 130,000 jobs along the value chain. And so as NUMSA, we believe that it is a critical strategic sector that necessary measures need to be taken to support its continuation and existence and to stay on top of this transition. We also believe that such support must come with conditions. South Africa must avoid rushing to be a part of the race to the bottom to attract investment in NEV manufacturing that might take the form of a final assembly of final products or just purely importing NEVs and not producing them within the country. So OEMs and components manufacturers must be forced to align to the developmental needs of the country and commit to build local manufacturing and complying with decent work standards. So to move to the policy measures that, as NUMSA, we are advocating for, that we think can still be implemented despite these broader limitations on what can happen to ensure the transition is just. We think that the future of quality jobs, meeting necessary targets to secure hardcore skills and guaranteeing job security for workers in the automotive sector is underpinned by success in the automotive components value chain. Whilst the transition is happening, and we can already see some hybrid production in certain automotive plants, NUMSA has called on government and the large multinationals to protect workers in those traditional ICE-related segments within the sector where we know component plants are already closing as a result of this transition from ICE to NEV. It's already happening. We're waiting on the policy to be, now it's been delayed to next year, February, we're going to get an announcement, but there's already jobs being lost and something needs to be done now to protect those jobs. For example, we've seen the loss of more than 400 jobs at a catalytic coater company in Gauteng by the name of Johnson Matthey, due to the fact that catalytic converters are not a part of NEV manufacturing. So those workers are already victims of the planning that hasn't been implemented so far. Given that Africa is not Europe and that there's still going to be demand for combustion engines, it was mentioned by a speaker before that South Africa is not going to be ready in the short time frame. It constitutes a failure and a lack of planning that we have no clear plan for the jobs that are already being lost in catalytic converter production, especially in light of South Africa having 90% of global reserves of platinum. It makes sense that South Africa should have a plan in place to catch as much of the legacy global catalytic converter production rather than allow them to close. And we also note that companies like Johnson Matthey play a role in the global hydrogen economy, especially fuel cell electric vehicle production. Why is government standing by and watching this company close so easily? To be practical about what we are proposing, we do not understand what would be difficult for DTIC to engage the OEMs in South Africa to ensure that all catalytic converters are produced in the country in the short term, and that we also look at the links of fuel cell electric vehicle production and the hydrogen economy, because that is linked to the existing capabilities of catalytic converter producers. And then on the issue of incentives, we believe that the type of incentives must be carefully crafted to enable localization. The existing production and assembly incentive under APDP right now is enough for OEMs to be transitioning into NEV production. This is evidenced by the huge surpluses we see in volume assembly localization allowance and the production incentive, which results in more imported vehicles and components into South Africa. So we're saying that doesn't need to be changed. We would like instead to see the state be bold and incentivize NEV production by bringing into South Africa key technologies, especially battery production and other specialized NEV components. In essence, we want plants for batteries for NEVs to be set up in South Africa. The support needed to develop these plants includes market support and manufacturing support. In terms of market support, NUMSA supports the proposal to zero rate the ad valorem on NEVs that's been mentioned. We think that but on the condition that this ad valorem zero rating support is restricted to domestically assembled or produced vehicles, so that it can create an additional source of volume for vehicles that make use of local components. If ad valorem support was given to imported electric vehicles, it would simply be subsidizing automotive sectors in developed economies. And then in terms of manufacturing support to attract more investment during the NEV transition, we recommend that the automotive investment scheme should be increased from 20 to 50% for NEV-related investments. Again, we must be clear that the volume assembly localization allowance and production incentive should not be changed to give any additional duty concessions for OEMs to import more components. And just for the final part of what I want to speak on today is skills development and job creation. Hey?
I said, are you going to close up in the next few minutes?
Yes, I'm almost done. Apologies for going over time. Skills development and job creation. So we fundamentally believe that skills development is a function of growth in NEV consumption and production requirements. You can't create skills if you haven't created the industry and the market for it. But we believe that skills development should be the work of an agency like MERSITA, to do the kind of research and look at the reskilling requirements, funding programs, etc. We believe, though, that it's also very critical that learning pathways are created for smart, motivated production workers to be given the opportunity to progress their electronic, IT, and other skills and associated formal education, so that they are in a position to take advantage of new opportunities that are emerging. While engineering qualifications are important, we think that we need to develop more advanced artisan and technician skills in the emerging NEV space. This is particularly important for younger production workers and women in the sector. The reality is that there have been high rates of women enrolling in artisan programs and TVET colleges in recent years, almost reaching parity with men in some cases. However, the industry uptake of women in employment is only a portion of those trained. The numbers drop significantly. So a key issue in this transition is that gender discrimination and stratification of the auto sector must be confronted. In discussions with NUMSA shop stewards, it's emerged that women are especially vulnerable to restructuring in plants. Employers and managers consider new technology as too sophisticated for women. They make claims that high voltage batteries somehow mean that women must be shifted to work packages that are somehow more manageable. But again, this brings us back to the question of austerity, because then when it comes to 4IR just transition, there'll often be a point mentioned that this is an opportunity to ensure that more opportunities are given to women to be employed. But the fundamental basis of austerity is it cuts spending in healthcare, social services, transport. And when you cut these things that are public responsibilities in a patriarchal society that we live in, they become subsidized by women who are forced to take up unpaid social reproductive labor in the home. So under these conditions, we cannot expect to transform industries that have historically excluded women from employment to begin to employ women en masse if the structure of society is designed to, is continually patriarchal and keeps women in the home on the basis of not taking public and societal responsibilities for social reproductive labor. On technology, innovation, and research,
I'm going to ask you to close up
Yes.
in the next 2 minutes. Okay.
Yes, 2 minutes. Technology, innovation, and research. I'm making the same point. It's important to expand our capacity there, but the GDP spending on research and development in South Africa, the portion of that is on research and development pales in comparison to economies that have developed their manufacturing capabilities, specifically in EV production. We support the view that this should not be limited to passenger vehicle manufacturing, that in terms of public transport, it should be a huge sector for uptake. Yeah, I'd like to wrap up there. I have no further comments to make. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That was a very eloquent and comprehensive input. I keep on being asked to start my video. Okay. I think that was a really interesting and comprehensive perspective. I think that the issues, Daniel, that you were raising speak to quite a number of the points that have been put onto the chat in terms of questions. And yeah, I mean, I wish that we had a few hours to take this conversation forward, because I really do think that the issues that you are raising have I think in them a set of potential solutions, and I think that ultimately this conversation has to get very urgently onto the question of solutions, because we're all saying this is extremely urgent, but in terms of our action, I would argue that coherent, integrated actions are really lagging the urgency of the problem that we are facing. But that's my own personal view, and let me be quiet then and hand over to Larissa Venter, who's the Head of Government Relations and Process Management at Zero Carbon Charge. Again, please can the panelists look at both the chat and the Q&A, and we'll get onto those issues. I'm going to ask some of the people, just to let you know that some of you who've posed questions or comments on the chat, it would be very good to have you speak to them when we get into the discussion after we've heard Larissa. Thanks. Larissa?
Thank you so much, Joanne. Good afternoon to all our panelists as well as our viewers. And I'd just like to thank the Presidential Climate Commission for giving this opportunity and platform to all of us. Today, I'd like to speak about the rollout of NEVs, new energy vehicles in South Africa, focusing not only on the challenges, but on the opportunities as well. Specifically, I want to focus on why a sustainable charging infrastructure network is critically important and is the only solution to a successful transition towards EVs, electric vehicles being sold in South Africa. Now, it's no secret, unfortunately, that, or fortunately rather, that the wave of EVs is coming sooner than we anticipate. And this gives us a unique opportunity to be at the front foot of the EV revolution. But this, as with all new things, is not without hurdles. And particularly when it comes to charging infrastructure, we have experienced in a short amount of time that there are quite a number of hurdles. To put it simply, our grid, managed by Eskom, was never built for the charging demand that EVs would present in South Africa. And I would like to stress that this is not unique to South Africa alone, of course. All over the world, questions are being asked about whether the grids in even the most developed countries will be able to handle the demands of a mass transition to new energy vehicles. Now, we know for certain that Eskom's grid lacks the capacity to efficiently accommodate the surge in electricity demand that widespread EV adoption would bring. And this necessitates the urgent deployment of a sustainable and renewable energy solution for charging these electric vehicles. Our company, Zero Carbon Charge, on Monday this week, actually, I'm proud to announce, officially started rolling out a revolutionary solution, a national network of 120 off-grid sustainable charging stations with charging infrastructure powered by photovoltaic solar panels. And we've launched our first site in the Northwest, and we are looking forward to many more being launched. This approach stands as a game changer, we believe, and in fact, the only viable solution in addressing the critical need for a lasting electric vehicle charging network. Firstly, our company believes that a totally green, sustainable, and eco-friendly solution is critically important when establishing an EV charging station, which is why we utilize solar power through photovoltaic panels. We provide a scalable, environmentally friendly, and self-sufficient charging solution that operates completely independently of the traditional grid. This innovative approach not only alleviates the strain on our current infrastructure, but it also ensures a reliable, accessible, and eco-friendly charging network throughout South Africa. Secondly, an EV charging station must have infrastructure in place to accommodate traffic, as well as a future surge in EVs to our market. And this is why we will implement 720 DC ultra-fast DC charging points for our EVs, plus 240 AC charge points for plug-in hybrids across our network. And I think this also echoes many points made by our previous panelists on the importance of infrastructure to be ready when the surge most definitely hits South Africa. Now, this means, of course, that each zero carbon charging site can charge an EV in about 20 minutes. Now, that is fast charging. By contrast, it'll take a standard on-grid AC charging station around about between 1 and 4 hours to fully charge an EV. Our business model, of course, differs from grid-based charging suppliers in that we are focused on mitigating range anxiety by establishing a network of EV charging stations 150 kilometers apart from one another. Our vision is to allow any EV driver then to be able to travel across South Africa without having a fear of not being able to charge your vehicle. Now, this means that land, of course, is needed to be acquired to set up these charging stations. And this is which led to our business model of leasing a portion of land from existing farmers and landowners to become innovative and supportive of farmers and landowners. So if I could share, by leasing land, we as a company, Zero Carbon Charge, provide support to landowners and farmers by giving them an income of 5% per annum from the annual gross turnover generated from our charging sites. Additionally, and I think this also echoes NIMSA's message about skills development, we also recognize that an EV revolution could hold the potential to develop skills. And this is why each site will also contribute 1% of the gross annual turnover towards local education and skills development. Our company intends to, pending various planning and land use application approvals, have its full network of solar-powered EV charging stations up and running by September 2025. However, and I hate to preach doom and gloom, this despite the immense promise, we continue to have hurdles that persist. The deployment of the planned 120 charging stations faces challenges linked to land use and environmental applications. We practice leasing land from owners rather than purchasing property, and this has resulted in complications with rigorous land use application processes. And moreover, the absence of a concrete EV policy further complicates matters, particularly in dealings with such as SUNROL, causing multiple delays in stalling applications for construction and land use approvals. Now, these challenges underscore the urgency of establishing a clear and coherent and supportive policy framework that facilitates the deployment of EV infrastructure. Streamlined policies could ease the hurdles related to land use, environmental concerns, and bureaucratic delays, fostering an environment conducive to widespread NEV adoption. To echo what Joanne said, we all need to work together to get this up and running. Zero Carbon Charge's vision is not just a solution. We believe that it's revolutionary and a step towards a sustainable future. However, to fully realize this vision, collaboration among stakeholders, policymakers, and innovators is paramount. And overcoming these hurdles and implementing supportive policies is essential to paving the way for an electric vehicle revolution in South Africa. I would like to close by reminding all members here today, whether it be viewers or panelists, that it is so important for us to work together to embrace sustainable solutions and to overcome any challenges, and to create an environment where electric vehicles or new energy vehicles can thrive, which will lead us to a greener and more efficient future for generations to come. Because this essentially, we fundamentally believe, and I believe other charging partners believe, that this will be a South African success story. It shouldn't be a global story where people come into South Africa to own the win. This can be a South African success story, and the time is now to prepare for the EV wave that will soon be coming in. I thank you. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much, Larissa, for that. I think that's really, really interesting, and that is really fast charging. Can I suggest that the way that we proceed is to take a round of questions and comments from the audience, and then what we'll do is give the panelists an opportunity to come back and respond and make closing comments, and then I'm going to hand over to the Executive Director of the PCC, Dr. Crispian Olver, to close and to talk a bit about the way forward. So the floor is open for anybody who would like to come in. Can you raise your hand, and maybe some of you who put your questions in the chat might want to speak to them. I see there are more questions coming onto the chat. Yeah. Don't be shy, people. Okay, anybody want to come in?
Thank you so much. I'm on mobile. I thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for all the presentation. I just want to check with the DTCI and transport for the plans that they have presented. Are those plans costed in terms, because I think what kind of frustrates me is that we do have policies for a lot of things, but at the end of the day, the implementation becomes the biggest problem. So I'm just saying that as we are all getting excited about what's coming, do we have a costed plan that we won't be stuck somewhere because there are no resources to implement? And I also want to touch on the issues that Nomsa raised regarding the skills, because as far as I understand, at least in my industry, which is the ICT, we import almost everything. So how do you then become effective and meaningfully contribute when you are an importer not producing anything? So I just want to understand if the DTCI and transport and other government agencies on the plans that we have, what is the real plan for skills development? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And sorry, I never got your name at the beginning.
My name is Lufunoti. I'm with Oreza Consulting. We are a cyber law consulting agency,
Okay.
but yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for that. So DTIC and Department of Transport, in your responses, please can you address those issues? And I think that a lot of this conversation really implicitly is about localization and the potential and our capacities. in the context of international value chains and an international industry. Okay, is there anybody else who's placed a question or a comment in the chat who'd want to speak to it a bit? I see there is, yeah, I'm not going to read out your names, you know who you are, but I think there are some really interesting issues that are raised. Is there anybody else who'd like to come in and speak to the issue or raise a new question or comment?
Thank you, Joanne. Can I go ahead?
Yes, and just introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Lebohang Dita. I have posted my questions on the Q&A, so I'll just read them out. I wanted to thank the panelists and hosts, and my question was to the DTIC and NUMSA. I know you've touched on some of these issues, but given the decades-long government support for the motor industry, what lessons are there for us going forward? One, local Black-owned OEM development, and two, job creation in relation to the size of the subsidies. And then my question to NUMSA was, what work is taking place, the development of other markets beyond UK, EU, especially in light of the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement? Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'm hoping that the panelists will respond to those issues in their comeback. Is there anybody else who wants to speak to a question or raise a new one?
Yes, there's some question here.
Okay. I see. Okay, I'm sorry, for some weird reason, I'm not actually seeing hands. So who is, could you introduce yourself?
Oh, thank you, Joanne. It's Nkosinathi Kambule here from Grassroots Climate Action. I had technical issues throughout this gathering, so I couldn't grab some of the points which the presenters were making. But however, I have 2 points of clarity which I would like the presenter to maybe assist me with. The first one is how far was the inclusiveness of the civil society on the development of the new energy vehicle policies, your white paper and the green paper, were they inclusive to civil society or not? That's what I'm trying to get. And then on the informal economy and the semi-formal economy, they are part of the automotive sector. So are there any plans that are catered for those kind of businesses and economies? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Nkosinathi. I understand there's a hand from Nompumelelo. Would you like to come in?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, my name is Nompumelelo Matubane from G4CA. I would like to ask Lorisa, she spoke about the land that is needed, and their focus is to lease the land from agriculture sector. I just want to know how safe everything it is, because if they can lease that land, then me as a farmer next to that, safe I am in that area. What about my produce? Am I safe enough? Is everything okay? Because now, if they talking about they including agriculture and they want that land, but what about the neighboring farmers that maybe they are nearby? Can she just maybe clarify on that, the safetiness of us as farmers? Thank you.
Okay, so the environmental and health and safety implications of charging infrastructure. All right, the next person is Simbarashe, who I think also put a number of comments in the chat, and I think that you addressed in specifically the skills issues, but come in.
Thank you, John. And thank you to the presenters for a wonderful discussion. Yes, indeed, I posted a few questions on the chat box. I'm Simba from TIPS. My questions are concerning the skill matching. I posted the first question was, skill matching is really going to be one of the challenges that we're going to face towards this transition process. Is there any analysis done so far in the transport industry to look at the workers' skills available, like skill profiling at the moment versus the skills that will be needed when we transition to the new energy vehicles? What is being done currently by the Transport Department, with also in conjunction with the Department of Trade and Industry, to enhance human or skill development in the transport industry to ensure that this transition is just and no worker is left behind? The next question that I also posed is on the, I know there's a discussion on the South African public charging stations that are being constructed, or a discussion on that one. What criteria is being used to determine where these public charging stations should be constructed, which province should get how much? Are we also considering the amount of international trade happening in different provinces and all that? And then I think everyone is much more worried about the transition process. We have wonderful plans set up. If you look in the transition in the transport industry, the ban is actually near. It looks like we have much time, but it's not a lot of time. What policies are currently existing to support workers in the community to ensure that this transition is fair? And maybe last one is a lot of emissions, I think, is also happening, like you said, on the road transportation. And we have quite a lot of road transport activities happening through import and export trade to our neighboring countries. The move to new energy vehicles, how is there sort of like a regional policy development that is happening to actually promote the move to new energy vehicles in our neighboring countries? Because we don't want to continue also having these emissions due to export and import trade. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think that's a comprehensive set of questions. I see that in the interim, there are quite a lot of questions that have come on that are really specific to Larissa. A number of questions also essentially around South Africa's competitiveness globally and our ability to put these value chains and to be able to localize. I think there's kind of a sort of a stream of thinking there. Also questions around how the subsidies could be retooled and reused. So just to kind of speak to those a bit. What I want to do is to suggest that we now give the panelists an opportunity to respond. I'm not asking you to do another whole presentation, but sort of 2 or 3 minutes each to give your views and respond to anything that you've seen in the chat or anything that you've heard in the questions that have been asked that you'd like to respond to. I want to suggest that we go in reverse order to the order that people, that the panelists initially spoke. So let's start with Larissa, then we'll go on to Daniel, then Mzwakhe, then Norman Lamprecht, then Pulani, and then we'll give it over to Dr. Olver at the end. Okay, so in 2 or 3 minutes. I think both your responses and your closing statements. And I think your closing statements, it would be useful for the PCC to be able to understand what you think the key one or two things are that the PCC should be engaging with or thinking about in this sector. Okay, so Larissa, over to you.
Thank you, Joanne. Just to clarify, would you like me to do my closing as well after I answer the question? Okay, great.
Yeah,
thank you
I think for all of the panelists, respond very briefly to the questions that have been asked if you want to, but also kind of, I think, to sum up would be useful in terms of, and I think it's really, the summing up is very much about saying where should we be going and what should we be doing going forward, what are the priorities. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joanne. And thank you so much for the question, which was, it's a very good question. We do get that quite a bit. So with Zero Carbon Charge, we have an entire team that comprises of environmental specialists, town planning specialists, and also engineers, agricultural knowledges, etc. So in terms of agriculture and whether your neighboring farm or your land would be safe, guaranteed, yes, your land would be safe should a station be next to your farm. Why I say this, when we have our site origination team go out and identify potential sites on land or on a farm, we approach a landowner because it is close to an existing interchange so that it's in line with SUNROL's requirements, and also to ensure that there would be safety should traffic or drivers then enter the charging facility. So it is close to the road, close to existing interchanges, and also, of course, we give the option to the landowner. More often we find that these landowners already have existing relationships with their neighbors, and they are informed and also eager for the project to take place. And then with regards to environmental, health and safety, we take this very seriously, of course, with our PV solar panels that would be, and the charging facility and the equipment used. In fact, if you were to remove the equipment, it would cause no damage to agricultural land. And just for your noting as well, and for comfort, we are also engaging with agriculture at a provincial level, but also nationally, to also talk about this and to explain our concept. I hope I've answered your question, but if not, feel free to drop me your follow-up question in the chat and I will be sure to get back to you. And then Joanne, just in closing, thank you so much for giving Zero Carbon Charge an opportunity. We are very, very keen on establishing the first sustainably, renewably energy powered national network of EV charging stations. We believe in supporting the EV transition because it will benefit the South African economy. It will foster jobs. It will be a fantastic opportunity, but more so, we're also interested in investing in the interest of landowners and farmers and also giving back to local education. But we are happy to work with all stakeholders because we are working towards a combined effort and one goal. Thank you so much for having us on this platform.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Larissa. Over to you, Daniel.
Hi, I'm just struggling. Is my video on?
Yeah, your video is on and we can hear you.
Great. So I think there was only one question I had to address, and that actually links to what my closing comment was going to be, which is essentially that for NUMSA, it's our view, and we think what the PCC should be prioritizing is that any plan or program supporting new energy manufacturing has to have a strong localization and components focus, for one, and the two, we need to have a fundamental shift away from neoliberal austerity. Neoliberal austerity may be something beyond the control of the PCC, but that's our key issue that we have in driving a just transition. But to go back to the question on the lessons from the automotive incentive policies over the years in terms of developing local Black-owned OEM development and job creation as it relates to the size of the subsidy. As I understand it, it's a question saying, the subsidies the government's giving, is it worth it for the jobs it's creating? That's how I'm interpreting the question. So for us as NUMSA, that's why it's important that we're saying now we've had these subsidies, but now what we need to incentivize is localization as part of this transition. as the only way to create more jobs as part of the subsidies, because the current subsidies also subsidize assembly, etc., and allow some imports. But we're saying that any new incentives have to be based on job creation, on localization along the component value chain and new energy vehicles, which is where the jobs are. And then in terms of local Black-owned OEM development, this is quite a challenge we have now, especially with the removal of local designation of sectors or products for localization, the public procurement bill and this new public procurement bill. It's undermined a lot of the powers to be able to really drive transformation in the sector. But we do believe that if we link that transformation to localization, that's a key way to also move away from white-owned multinational OEMs and towards more Black-owned OEMs. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, and thanks for picking up that that question. Can we now hear from the DTIC and from Mzwakhe Mbata?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rowan. I don't know why the video was not showing initially. Yeah, I took some 3 questions from all what has been raised. Fundamentally, we have we did the cost-benefit analysis for the just transition, in particular for the automotive industry. So all those details in terms of levels of support will be ventilated in the next budget speech that is taking place next year in February. And secondly, whether or not the civil society was included in the policy making process. Yes, indeed. Part of the slide that I presented demonstrated, with clarity, the various stakeholders that we have consulted, including the academia, as well as the policy institutions, including civil society organizations that have actually contributed. All in all, we got more than 36 submissions that we have consolidated in the policy making that immediately after the green paper, and then we had to transition that particular green paper to create to do a framework for the white paper, the roadmap, and the details of the white paper, of course, immediately after the budget speech. Then we can also share the details. And lastly, when it comes to the role of others, our sister countries in Africa, South Africa is a gateway to Sub-Sahara, and as such, through Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement, we are facilitating regional integration. So we will be working with other sister countries, both in the region and in Africa as a whole. Some of the countries have already established their automotive sector. We have also supported them at the level of putting industrial policies that we support them. And some of our OEMs are exporting some of the SK semi-knockdown kits to various countries in Africa. Through the regional and continental integration, we will therefore be in a position to facilitate trade amongst other African countries. And lastly, in closing, from the perspective of our side, just to reiterate the point that we have made, that if we maintain the status quo and nothing happens, this transition won't be just, but secondly, it will mean it will cause disaster both to our economy as well as the industry as a whole. Therefore, we are very committed to support the just transition in order to sustain the jobs, but equally, we also want to extend the value chain, the automotive value chain, so that we can focus on the critical components that gets into these new energy vehicles and begin to deepen localization. And part of our automotive master plan 2035 spells exactly that, and it also gives the targets of local content, including where the sector is supposed to go to be at in 2035. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for those responses and for addressing the regional integration issues. Okay, can we move on to Dr. Lamprecht? I think there've been a whole set of questions and comments made around the industry and where it sees itself going and what needs to happen. So over to you for your responses and closing comments.
Yeah, thank you. Now, I see some of the questions have disappeared there, but
yeah, they have.
Just one that I saw in terms of NEVs, something that I've actually eliminated due to time, in the interest of time. But NEVs, we use that term in the industry because that incorporates all the alternatives: hybrid, plug-in hybrid, battery, electric, fuel cells, natural gas, biofuels, and so on. On the autonomous vehicles or the actually self-driving features, many cars already have got that. That's one of the features. Autonomous vehicles is just a feature, so it doesn't actually, policy impact on that as such. Doesn't matter if it's a petrol, diesel, or electric autonomous vehicle. It's just, the power source is actually what we are talking about. The first question is in terms of policy direction, local production of semiconductors, microchips. We know that globally, 2021, 7 million vehicle production lost because of the semiconductor. It's basically a supply and demand issue. 10% goes for automotive, 90% for the electronics and cell phones and so on. And there was a backlog. Still last year, 4.2 million vehicles lost, and it's still a problem, although it's eased somewhat. But I mean, we try and localize as much as possible in South Africa. The benefits of the APDP2 are based on localization. So one must also be realistic, for this industry is all about volumes. So when you talk about microchips, you talk about investments of billions of rands, and you need to manufacture millions and millions, and every OEM specifications and requirements differ. So it's not just attracting an investment. It must benefit the industry and all the OEMs in terms of volumes and so on. Then basically the further question on the impact of recasting the current subsidies for the on ICE in favor of NEVs. NAMSA released an NEV4 leadership paper. I was for that earlier this year. It's on the NAMSA website.
I don't know if it's only on my side, Norman, but you're coming and going.
Taxes going straight to the fiscus, and there's ways and means to address that. And as mentioned, we go with evidence-based solutions, which is and we understand the fiscal constraints. Okay, just see. I know there's some load shedding perhaps on my side. Can you hear? Is it better?
Yes. Yeah, no, you kind of disappeared for a second, but then I think I came back really fast.
Let me just continue in the meantime.
Okay.
Then just a question in terms of community.
Have we lost?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. I think it's better if you switch your camera off, actually. Yeah, carry on.
Probably helps.
Yeah.
See the rest well. But in any case, that question in terms of the community, the DTIC green paper was published for public comment, and I assume the same will happen with the white paper. So that's where inputs from the community side. The public charging infrastructure, the comment that I just want to make there, in our NEV4 leadership paper, public charging stations up to end of 2022, total 305. If we want full coverage in the country, we need 262,000. So there's huge opportunities for everybody. The criteria set in terms of the NAMSA project with the Automotive Industry Transformation Fund. The intention is providing the phase 1 of to put up public charging stations along the highways to a black-owned company. And the criteria involve issues such as the billing compatibility, fast charging locations, and so on. So, I mean, it's a typical requirements, you know, it doesn't deviate from internationally and so on. Then the question about looking beyond UK and EU, I mean, we export, our industry exported to 152 countries around the world. The export manual publication, which I'm responsible for as an official source of key trade data to the industry, indicate that, you know, our exports destinations increase every year. Every year we double, like last year, 29 of the 152 export destinations. So the export value is more than double on a year-on-year basis. And Africa is a priority focus. The US with AGOA through the Export Council, there was also a study commissioned as far as that is concerned. But the issue is simply that the head offices allocate the locations of the investments. Thailand, South Africa, and Argentina, for example, will produce the Hilux Bokkie, and Thailand will service Asia, South Africa will service Africa and Europe, and Argentina, Americas, for example. So that is also global realities. You know, because of the free trade agreement with the UK and the EU, we obviously benefit hugely as far as that arrangement is concerned, which enhance our exports and so on. Basically, my closing remark is just, you know, two key features of this industry that stand out for me. One is long-term policy certainty, and the second one is constructive collaboration amongst all the stakeholders. We realized in 1995, that Ms. Wage mentioned, when the MRDP was implemented, if you want to be part of the global automotive environment, you cannot afford a weak link. This industry is fully integrated into the global automotive environment, and through the industry, we obviously want to assist the just transition, and also obviously it's inevitable to transition to NEVs, not just to sustain the industry, but also to successfully grow the industry. And all we require is just urgency in terms of the policy pronouncements, in terms of the support framework. African countries already, because of progressive policies, Morocco, Egypt, and so on, attract these investments. And there are 263 countries in the world. The head office has got a huge choice, and a cost parity exercise is basically determine where the investment will go. Subsidiaries compete for these investments, and you really need to stand out if you're already behind in terms of this NEV race. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Norman. I think that was a very comprehensive response. We're going to move on to Polani, who's last but certainly not least. So Polani, I think from the perspective of overall policy, in overall country policy in relation to transport, let's hear your input and your closing comment.
Thank you, Joanne. From my side, I'm just going to sum up in responding to all the questions. In terms of our public transport, the existing policies, we have the current public transport strategy that looks at the taking of public transport, and then we have that includes the integrated public transport networks, our BRT, which we are already implementing in several metros within the country. And then we also have the road freight strategy that also was approved, and then it looks at the component of moving from road to rail, and also passenger and freight. And not forgetting that within the freight, within our branch, integrated transport planning, we have the Freight Logistics Directorate, which is currently looking at the freight logistics roadmap. And then that will ensure that as a department, we integrate our work in and we work together. And in some of the questions, is in terms of regional integration, yes, we are doing regional integration. We have our agent, so entity, Cross-Border Road Transport Agency, who will be looking at issues of regional integration when it comes to just transition, and they are part of the committee, or that was part of the capacity building workshop that we did in June. And then in terms of skills, I will say, as I've indicated in my presentation, the socio-economic part is core of the Just Transition Plan for the transport sector. And then skills development, reskilling will be part of the Just Transition Plan for the transport sector. So we will not leave that part behind. We'll be looking at it. And then for the new energy vehicles legislation, currently at the department, we are looking at the project where we'll be identifying gaps on the current overall road transport legislation in terms of autonomous vehicles. And then we are also looking at the infrastructure readiness on whether we'll be able to, we will be ready when all these autonomous vehicles enter the country. We will be ready to respond to that. And maybe in closing, Joanne, I will say transition will take place, or it's already taking place. All that we just need to do is to ensure that we respond to it in a just manner, and we respond to it, we resolve the trouble challenges of the country, and we should not compromise the livelihoods of their fellow South Africans. Thank you, Joanne.
Okay, thank you very much, Pulani, for that. I mean, I think that maybe just my closing comment before I hand over to Dr. Olver is, I have a feeling that there is a lot more work and a lot more conversation to happen, and I think in particular, the work that the work that both is being done right across the board by all of the social partners in this regard somehow needs to get brought together into a comprehensive overview where we can really, I think, find consensus on what it is possible to find consensus on and identify in a much finer way where our differences are so that we can move about resolving them. I think the work that the Department of Transport is doing is a real opportunity for the country because it is quite broad in its scope and much wider than any of the individual industries or sectors or set of social partner interests that we've heard here today. So I really am looking forward to that piece of work and the consultation that we would need to take forward. I also do think that one of the big areas where there's got to be a lot more detailed work is on these issues around two things. The first is around the skills development, and the other thing is around the opportunities for the development of new industries and new enterprises and new entrants, and particularly opportunities for SMMEs and for disadvantaged people. So I'm hoping that those kinds of issues, which we haven't delved into a huge amount of detail today, can form part of what is an ongoing PCC conversation going forward. So with that, let me say thank you to you all. I've certainly learned a lot during the course of this conversation. I hope you all have. And over to you, Crispian, to talk about the way forward and to do the closure. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. And once again, hello everyone. The host has disabled my video. I wonder if one of you could enable it. Okay, there we go. Yes, okay, hi there. Good to see you all again. So this has been an incredibly rich discussion, and I want to thank you, Joanne, for the expert way you facilitated it, and for all of our presenters. I mean, we really had a broad cross-section of government and worker and private sector inputs. And I think you were able to really come to terms with the core issues. And thank you to the audience who joined us for this engagement and for all the questions you've raised. So I'm going to be very brief. I mean, I think the key points that have been well made by all of you. The industry, the auto manufacturing industry is vitally important. we heard from Norman, it makes up 22% of all manufacturing in South Africa. There's 110,000 jobs. Daniel from NUMSA mentioned 130,000 jobs in the value chain. I mean, these are big numbers. And what you've brought out is, I think, the uniqueness of our industry, because we're, as Norman explained, integrated into this global market. Half of our vehicles go to countries that are phasing out the ICE vehicles. And it means that the dynamics in this market are slightly different compared to the rest of the transition. So on the energy transition, we're transitioning according to the demand in our own domestic market. But here with auto manufacturing, we've got to be acutely sensitive to what's happening in our export markets. Otherwise, we're going to lose a vast portion of the demand. And we could well, as some of you have said, lose the industry as a whole. So we need to move urgently. I think that's very clear. We had a little bit of a debate about targets. It was very good, Norman, to hear the NAMSA target. So, you're talking about 40,000 new energy vehicles on the road by 2030. Previously, as the Commission, we had put a higher number out, but maybe the NAMSA targets are more realistic. And what we're going to see is this transition, accelerate. If you look at how these transitions move in other countries around the world, they start slowly and then they really take off. And we've already seen this huge acceleration in the move to EVs elsewhere in the world. Norman gave us the number of 1.2 million NEVs by 2035. I mean, that's starting to really gather momentum. What was good to hear today was, the different interventions that are in the pipeline. So DTIC tells us about this NEV strategy. We know that there's, a detailed conversation. Mzwakhe referred to the nitty-gritties of the incentives, which are being discussed with National Treasury and which we understand are going to appear in the budget. And, I think we're all aware that we can't do wide-scale demand-side subsidies. We're going to be doing supply-side incentives. Those are going to build on the automotive program development plan. So, that'll be the foundation for building that. It was very good to hear about the Department of Transport's Just Transition Transport Strategy. I think, as Joanne said, that's going to create the broader policy framework for these interventions. And what we didn't talk a lot about today, but which I do want to direct your attention to, is the JET implementation plan, which was approved by Cabinet last week, and it's been released to the public now. And if you haven't read it, there's a chapter on NEVs there that I think really sets out the state of work very comprehensive. And, in there they talk about the funding, they talk about the demand and the supply side, they talk about the infrastructure that we need. And there are a couple of really interesting things mentioned in that chapter. So there's a review of the tax regime that's underway with a number of the players. There's very substantial funding being channeled via IDC, including a very substantial program, Daniel, on batteries. The plan mentions this 19 billion rand pipeline on battery investments. And they also talk about the Uyilo Technology Innovation Fund and scaling up that. And I mean, that fund's been doing some really interesting, innovative work. The other thing you've all emphasized is the importance of skills investment. And, clearly we want to see a dedicated NEV skills investment program. We need to do it in partnership with the MERS-CETA. And I think this is something that we need to explore a lot more in our next conversation. And then on the charging infrastructure, I think the market, the challenge is there. And it was thrilling to hear from a company like Zero Carbon Charge, how they're spotted the market gap. They're moving in to build this network of 120 charging stations. They're doing it with solar power. So these are the kinds of interventions that I think are going to really help take this industry to scale. So, just in terms of follow-up, I think it would be good as the Climate Commission for us to convene the next engagement. It would be good to dig into a couple of the issues in a little bit more detail. So I think we want to hear a little bit more about how these incentives are going to work. And maybe we should do it just after the budget speech, once, Treasury has put its head on the block in terms of what those incentives should be. I think we want to hear from all of these different players about the policies and plans that you spoke about today. We'd like to see them coming to fruition next year. I think we want to dig in a little bit more detail into the skills plan. And I think we should get Joanne or someone from the JET IP team to just talk in more detail about their skills chapter. So we'll put that into motion. We'll start planning a follow-up engagement on this. And maybe just to end on the note of urgency, this transition is coming down the tracks very rapidly. If we don't move with speed, we are going to find ourselves, this is a very competitive global economy. Everyone's trying to move into this new space. And if we're laggards in the space, we're at risk of losing our entire auto manufacturing industry and all of the value chains that feed into it. So we've got to embrace this transition with all due urgency and deliver on the various things we do. So thank you for joining us. Once again, thank you to our speaker and facilitators, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you,
Thank you
Crispian.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Crispian. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.